tough choice: continue their dream of education or drop out to help their family put food on the table. You can help change their future in a single moment. See how far your support can go at unbound.org.
Is this the tether?
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The college basketball season ended with a dominant performance by UConn. UConn beat highly competitive San Diego State by 17 to win their 5th national championship since 1999. Sunday's LSU-Iowa women's national title game set a record with 9.9 million viewers on ABC ESPN. The rating topped a previous record of 4.85 million viewers for last year's title game between South Carolina and UConn. LSU players are not feeling a suggestion made by First Lady Jill Biden. Biden says she would like to invite LSU and Iowa to the White House for a celebration. White House celebrations for sports teams are usually just for the champions. LSU guard Alexis Morris said she would rather go to Michelle Obama's house if Jill Biden insists on bringing Iowa. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, conversation, and opinions when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
Access granted.
In a survey conducted by the public opinion research firm Eviderus, KBLA Talk 1580 consistently emerged as the station of choice for black audiences in the Los Angeles media market and beyond. The survey also revealed that the vast majority of black audiences are concerned about the lack of black-owned media and are more likely to listen to talk radio that focuses on issues that impact the black community. For some reason, the other talk stations haven't quite figured that out.
If you think about KFI, well, KFI only has like a 3% black listenership. 3%. So there's a good 97% out there to support a station like KBLA.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black. Your black. Your black.
1, 2, 3, go! Try to keep it coming. Things ain't always smooth. Oh, but I'll be alright as long as I can find the groove. Yes, I will. Somehow I know that I can make it. You seem to like my style. Don't you worry, I'm gonna be around a while.
Live from Leimert Park, USA, I'm Tavis Smiley. You're listening to KBLA Talk 1580. So glad to see you and me back in stride again. Our phone number, 1-800-920-1580. 1-800-920-1580. All of our socials can be found at KBLA 1580. That's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, everything at KBLA 1580. Let me invite you right now to download our app as well at KBLA 1580. Download the app and take us with you anywhere in the world and listen to us in real time, but only by downloading our app right now at KBLA 1580. Should you miss us any day in real time, check out the podcast of our program by going to the app, the website, Anchor, Spotify, Apple, so many places to get the podcast and listen at your leisure should you miss us any day in real time. But I am delighted to have you along live with us today for the next 3 hours. You can also watch the live stream of this program by tapping on the KBLA TV icon on our app or by going to our YouTube channel. And let me invite you to follow me on Facebook and Instagram at The Real Tavis Smiley and get Twitter updates at Tavis Smiley. Another great show on tap for you today. In our second hour, we'll talk politics with Chris Lehman, Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief for The Nation magazine. There are so many trending topics to talk about today politically, but I suspect we may begin and end hour two with Donald Trump, the first former president to have been twice impeached and the first to be criminally charged, turning himself in today to Manhattan authorities to face arraignment. We'll unpack it all with the nation's Chris Lehman in hour two. As it turns out, watching the clock, somewhere I suspect in hour three, is the exact moment that Donald Trump will be arraigned, but we'll be ahead of that in the second hour as we discuss it with Chris Lehman of The Nation. Historic day in this nation. given the Trump arrangement in Manhattan. In our third hour.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
55 years ago today, the greatest American we have ever produced was gunned down, assassinated on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis. In hour 3, we'll be joined by Michael Eric Dyson, prominent scholar, noted public intellectual, and prolific author of many texts, including I May Not Get There With You, the true Martin Luther King Jr. MED on MLK in hour 3, 55 years later. Lord have mercy. But in this first hour today, 2 more conversations on the B side of this hour after being inspired to commit resources to promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion just 3 years ago. Following the murder of George Floyd, American companies are now phasing out DEI officers at an alarmingly high rate just 3 years later. And it won't surprise you to know today that the workers being most impacted, take a guess? Of course, black workers. We will speak with Dr. Nika White, author of Inclusion Uncomplicated, on the backside of this hour. That said, let's commence today's show with this. While today marks the 55th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination, it was 100 years ago this year when Marcus Garvey's dubious conviction on federal charges of mail fraud brought the momentum of his UNIA, Universal Negro Improvement Association, to a halt. Indeed, Dr. King once acknowledged Garvey as the first man of color in the history of the United States to lead and develop a mass movement. That's King on Garvey. I am pleased to be joined now by Howard University law professor and executive director of the Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center, Justin Hansford, for a conversation about Marcus Garvey, 100 years in the making. Professor Hansford, how are you today, sir?
Great. How you doing?
I'm doing the best I can. If I complain, that'd be an ingrate, and I am delighted to have you on today on this historic day. Just fascinating that Donald Trump will be arraigned today. We commemorate 55 years since King's assassination, 100 years since the Marcus Garvey moment. So it's a lot going on in this country today as we reminisce about our history and try to navigate a path forward. Let me just start with this right quick, and we'll go from there, just watching my time here. What would you say is Marcus Garvey's enduring legacy?
Well, Garvey is he's a interesting figure because we know that he created the largest movement of black people that we know unto this date, over 5 million members in the Universal Negro Improvement Association. And his message was one of black pride, of economic empowerment, Pan-Africanism, and overall just a transformational figure for our people. So I think his legacy, to me, is that spirit of anti-colonialism, standing up against apartheid here in the United States, and really fighting for dignity for all black people. And I think that's something that was carried out through the music of people like Bob Marley, who used his words as lyrics, as you mentioned. Dr. King, Malcolm X, others took on his legacy. Malcolm X's parents were actually members of his organization who were organizers. And, I think that 100 years later, we're seeing the echoes in the Black Lives Matter movement and the push towards, discussions of reparations. We're still seeing reverberations unto today.
And yet, with all that said, it just feels to me, you're the scholar here, I'm just a lowly talk show host, but it feels to me, given what I do every day, that with all that, again, you've just delineated, that Marcus Garvey, 100 years later, still has not gotten his proper respect. That's just my read of it. What's your read?
That's the perfect read, Tavis. It's a situation where so many people cite him as an inspiration, but very few people actually go back and read his works. You know, the first FBI agents hired in the United States in American history by J. Edgar Hoover were hired specifically to infiltrate Garvey's organization. So as a result, we have more information on Garvey than we do of almost any other figure in our history because he was spied on so much. And so people can go back and read his words, read his works. You know, there are things that he did 100 years ago. I'm part of a panel at the UN that's going to be writing a Declaration of Rights for people of African descent this year, and that's something that Garvey did 100 years ago, and we just didn't realize the forward-thinking nature of his project back at that time period. But we're still trying to catch up today the things he did back then.
As you just heard Professor Hansford mention, J. Edgar Hoover first hired FBI agents to infiltrate Marcus Garvey, and as a result, we know more about Garvey than perhaps any other black leader because they went in on him back when. I guess the question when we come forward that we'll tackle immediately is, why was Marcus Garvey such a threat that J. Edgar Hoover? We know why he was threatened by Malcolm X. We know why he was threatened by Dr. King. But why was Marcus Garvey such a threat that the first officers Hoover hired were hired to infiltrate the organization, the UNIA, run by one Marcus Garvey? We'll get that question answered and a bit more when we come forward with Justin Hansford on KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about. Good thing we've got 3 hours. More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Hi, Maisha Cairo here, KBLA, live at Chase Bank on Crenshaw and Vernon for the In This Together tour with female business owners, a day of empowerment, community panels, and best of all, tips on building business from marketing to capital. I was able to speak with one of the panelists, the owner of Kids Love. Take a listen.
So Kids Love, KIDSLUV, is a first-to-market zero-sugar, vitamin-enhanced functional beverage for kids.
So the zero sugar is really important because if not, the sugar gets on the teeth, it can cause cavities. So as a mom, I love this vitamins and hydration in one. Tell us what's happening here with Chase Bank today.
So I would say, I think what Chase is trying to do is create a community actually for entrepreneurs, a place where people can go. They have the space to do it. It's a beautiful space. And to be able to have these conversations. There are so many benefits to being a women-owned and certified business, from a standpoint of getting into stores, not paying the slotting fees of what it takes to be in stores. So I think Chase is trying to bring awareness to a lot of the things that people just don't know about, that not only the bank can help, but outside of the bank, their relationships can help create.
That's beautiful. And I know, this is how we build equity in communities of color, is kind of spreading that information and that knowledge. So thank you for being here today and doing your part and letting these women know that it is possible.
For KBLA 1580, I'm Maisha Cairo in the community with Chase.
Are you looking to steer your career in a new direction? Driving for Culver City Bus can be your ticket to a long-lasting career with excellent benefits and paid training. Culver City Bus is looking for customer service and safety-minded bus operators to join the growing team. Culver City Bus offers on-the-job training starting at $19.10 per hour, uniform allowance, and health benefits. Culver City Bus is a great employer. Let Culver City Bus connect you with an essential service job. If you enjoy driving, seek real opportunities for career advancement, and passionate about making a difference in the community, then you are invited to join the Culver City Bus team. Start your journey today by submitting an application at culvercity.org/jobs. For more info, visit culvercitybus.com or call live customer service operators at 310-253-6500. Again, 310-265-6500.
Nerds! Here at NerdWallet, we often see people wrestle with financial decisions.
Mike is in the ring, up against his nemesis, indecision. Mike can't decide the best way to save his money, and indecision has him boxed in. But wait, Mike tagged in NerdWallet!
Whew, let's go. With NerdWallet's side-by-side comparisons, you can find a high-yield savings account with interest rates that earn more bank for your buck. So the next time you wrestle with a financial decision, You'll come out on top. NerdWallet, the smartest decision for all your financial decisions.
Interrogating your assumptions and expanding your inventory of ideas. Let's get back to Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580.
Let's get back to Justin Hansford, professor of law at Howard, and we are in conversation in this hour, the first half of this hour, about Marcus Garvey. We are commemorating today the 55th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. King. We'll do that more expressly in hour 3 with Michael Eric Dyson, but we start today's program looking back not 55 years ago, but 100 years ago, to the time of one Marcus Garvey, whose movement came to a halt, essentially, after the government put some dubious mail fraud charges on him. And we're looking back 100 years later on this historic moment to see what impact Garvey has had on the movement for freedom and justice and equality in this country. Before I get to that, let me go to the question that I posed a moment ago, and that is why Marcus Garvey, Professor Hansford, was such a threat to Hoover and the FBI.
Well, the thing about Garvey is he had a vision that was an independent vision, an independent economic vision, really exemplified by the Black Star Line, which was a shipping company that many people looked at as a way to take black people back to Africa, but to be honest, was a vision for an independent economic commerce trade route between the Caribbean, Africa, and the United States that would be black-owned, that would allow us to create our own independent economic exchange. And that itself was a huge threat. As you know, that during that time, colonialism was dominating the African continent and the Caribbean. Black people were in the middle of Jim Crow. And the idea of us being able to find our way around the barriers of apartheid and colonialism and interact with each other would have really just brought that system to a collapse. So it was an economic threat. Of course, it was a political threat. He was advocating for the creation of an independent black state at a time when all countries on the African continent outside of Ethiopia were under colonial rule. And in general, he was telling black people to rise up and to be more assertive in their assertion of their need for rights and equality. So this was something that was always a threat in a tangible sense as well as just in a psychological sense to the United States of America.
Economically speaking, that Black Star Line, I've long thought about this, that Black Star Line, again, in terms of economics, was a pretty ambitious idea, was it not?
Very ambitious. I think if people, even today, it's 2023, we don't have a black-owned airline that is carrying goods between black merchants independently. I mean, it's something that 100 years later we have not recreated. We have not accomplished it. So it was always this vision. I mean, you hear stories about people, in different parts of the world, in the Caribbean and Africa and the U.S. who, were going through tough times, and they saw hope in this idea of a black star line that would come and take them back to Africa or come and help them gain an independent platform to be able to thrive without having to go through the white power structure to do so. And that idea of having an independent vision of liberation that didn't have to go through asking the white man for something was always a threat.
Yep.
Always a threat.
For those who know the story, which we'll get to in a moment, Marcus Garvey was ultimately extradited, kicked out of this country, as it were. But before I get to the end, let me come back to the beginning, and that is how and why, and I mean both of those, how and why did Marcus Garvey end up in the United States?
Garvey came to the United States inspired by Booker T. Washington, who was one of his heroes, saying that he saw that there was no leadership in the African American community that was setting up an independent vision. He said, "Where's the black man's army? Where's his navy? Where's the black man's government? Where's the black man's men of big affairs? I could not find them. I decided I'd want to be the one to help make them." So he came to the U.S. thinking that initially he's going to create a black Tuskegee, like a educational institution. But then as he went through the South and toured the country, he had a different vision for this creation of the UNIA. He created, dry cleaning companies, many small businesses throughout the country, organized under the idea of, black economics, and eventually the Black Star Line was the crown jewel of that process. So he really came as you could say, as a visionary and entrepreneur, but ended up finding himself in a leadership position in the country.
Give me some sense of how, I of course recall studying this back in college, but give the audience some sense of how energized people were in the diaspora by his calling for an end to colonialism in Africa.
Oh boy, there's stories about people reading his newspaper. He published a newspaper called The Negro World, and you had many writers. Zora Neale Hurston was a writer. Famous black writers got their start in that paper. But in places where they couldn't read, they'd find one person, say in different parts of the Caribbean and Africa, who could get their hands on that paper, and they'd memorize the article and go back and tell everybody what was in it, and the word spread. I mean, you're thinking about 1920s, so we're just maybe one generation out of enslavement, deep in the heart of colonialism. Literacy levels are low because of the lack of schooling, but people still got the word out. People still heard about this vision, and they were just captured by it, because it was this idea that we could build up a place on the hill for ourselves. The phrase, "Up you mighty race, you will accomplish what you will." This idea that we could make our dreams come true, and we didn't have to, beg or borrow to do that. We could do it on our own 2 feet. That was the Garvey vision, and it inspired black people throughout the diaspora in a way that really, truly, it's hard to say that it's been done, but since then, in the last 100 years, even with Black Lives Matter, civil rights movement, those are great visions, but to have an organization with members, people paying dues, and 5-6 million strong, and on all these different, at one point it was 40 different countries where you had members, and they had Liberty Halls set up everywhere from Costa Rica to South Africa. Influenced Nelson Mandela down in South Africa, all the way up to, Europe and London, and in the United States. I mean, it was really an emergence like we haven't seen since.
How was Garvey regarded or not during his heyday by other black leaders? And I asked that again because we'll get to Dr. King in today's 55th anniversary of his assassination later in our program. And one cannot look at the last year of King's life without looking at all the hate he received from other black leaders, in part because he came out against the war in Vietnam, and people thought that he was picking a fight with Lyndon Johnson, who at the time many felt, certainly the bourgeois elite felt, that Lyndon Johnson was the best friend that the Negro had since Abraham Lincoln. Johnson passes the Civil Rights Act and passes the Voting Rights Act. And so there were a lot of people mad at Martin for getting in this fight or picking a fight, as they saw it with Johnson, over the war in Vietnam. Martin would hear none of it and continued to make his point that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and he pressed his claim about the war in Vietnam. And of course, we know all these years later that Martin was right and everybody else was wrong about the war in Vietnam. But there were a lot of black folk, black preachers, black politicians, black organization heads, Roy Wilkins, Whitney Young, all kinds of people, frankly, who came out against Dr. King in that last year over this fight he was having with Lyndon Johnson again about the war in Vietnam. We'll get to that in hour 3. I raise it now because I'm curious as to what kind of response or not Garvey was receiving 100 years ago from other African-American, other black leaders in the diaspora, certainly in this country.
It's almost an equal experience. He had opposition from W.B. Du Bois. Now, to be clear, he was a disciple of the Booker T. Washington School of Economic Empowerment, and of course, we know the famous debate between Booker T. Washington and Du Bois. Du Bois favoring the talented 10th approach of focusing on academics for our youth, and Booker T. Washington focusing on vocational training. So Garvey was sort of a built-in rival to Du Bois, but then there were class elements. Garvey advocating for, sort of economic uplift of the masses, and as an immigrant himself, coming from low economic status, and then Du Bois is a Harvard graduate. So there was that built-in battle, and then what ended up happening is others in the NAACP took up campaign saying Garvey must go. And we talk about in one of the some of the research I've done on Garvey, I've talked about how they actually came up with a theory that Garvey could be sued and deported on grounds of mail fraud, and they actually wrote a letter urging the government to bring those charges, which they ultimately did. So, it really is a dark day. I mean, it's one of those things we'd like to think that our leaders would all get along and agree that even if they don't want the same approach, they could at least see the benefit of allowing everyone to do their thing. But that's not really how it goes down.
Yep.
People want theirs to be the main vision.
Yeah,
at the cost of others, mutually exclusive. Yeah.
And to your point, some of that hate led to Garvey being deported from the U.S. Looking at my clock here, we got just about 3 minutes left in conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Give me your sense of how his deportation from this country impacts his legacy. Situate the deportation in the broader context of his legacy, if you will.
The way to think about it is, if you're in this battle of ideas, and you deport the leader of one of the leading strategies of empowerment, specifically economic empowerment, you'll see the other strategies rise. So throughout the 20th century, we saw a focus on civil rights, political rights, voting rights, but this idea of creating an independent economic pathway for black people throughout the diaspora, that idea really just fell to the wayside in the middle of the 20th century. So if you look at the wealth gaps that we see today, we do have, you could say constitutional rights. We do have a lot of rights, but we don't have the economic parity that maybe we could have created independently if we had followed Garvey's platform. We still don't have a Black Star Line, not a shipping company or an airline. So, I think that it shifted the way that we as a people pursued our movement. The energy was there. Everybody was going to try to fight to get free, but the actual leadership, the actual strategy, the actual tactic of economic empowerment was taken off the plate. Specifically, that Pan-African economic empowerment model was taken off the plate, off the menu at that time, and we haven't really recovered since. So, to me, I think this idea of there's a push for the exoneration of Marcus Garvey, and we're asking President Biden to give Marcus Garvey a posthumous pardon. It's symbolic, but it would help us to start this conversation and help people to remember his legacy and remember the important approach that he was trying to take, and of a Pan-African economic uplift approach to black liberation.
And how likely do you think that posthumous pardon is forthcoming from Joe Biden?
Well, we have to push. We know Kamala just got back from Africa, and maybe she'll come back with a new lease on her, or a new vision on African liberation, and we'll push for that pardon. I think she has Jamaican ancestry, as a matter of fact, so there's a reason for hope there. And, they pardoned Jack Johnson. That was actually President Trump who pardoned Jack Johnson.
Trump,
so it's been done.
and speaking of Trump, we'll get to him in hour 2. So all these dots are connected.
Right.
We'll get to Trump in hour 2. We'll get to MLK and the 55th anniversary of his assassination in hour 3. But we started today, this program 100 years ago, just another historic moment. When we saw the momentum behind Garvey's powerful UNIA movement come to a halt when he was deported from these shores, primarily owing to the fact he was pushing an agenda of economic empowerment for people to look like you and me. Think about that. They deported the brother, deported him, kicked him out for pushing an agenda essentially of economic empowerment for you and for me. And to Professor Hansford's point, look where we are all these years later. A century later, no black-owned airline, no black-owned shipping company, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I digress. Professor Hansford, thanks for your work, man. Good to have you on. All the best to you, sir.
All right. Thank you. Enjoyed it.
My pleasure. After news, traffic, and sports, what's happening to all these DEI officers and why are they being pushed out 3 years after everybody in corporate America made a commitment to do better by diversity, equity, and inclusion? They are firing these DEI officers like nobody's business. Why? And who's being impacted by it? After news, traffic, and sports on KBLA Talk 1580.
Be sure to like and follow Tavis Smiley at The Real Tavis Smiley and get Twitter updates at Tavis Smiley. The conversation continues when we come forward.
Good morning, I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. Multiple U.S. Secret Service agents connected to former President Trump have been subpoenaed as part of an investigation into Trump's handling of classified documents. Reports say the subpoenas are related to Special Counsel Jack Smith's probe into Trump over the FBI's discovery of materials during a search of his Florida estate last year. A Southern California native is one of 4 astronauts NASA has chosen to fly around the moon by the end of next year. Victor Glover of Pomona will pilot the 10-day Artemis II mission. Glover is a U.S. Navy captain, a pilot, and the first black man to work on the International Space Station. The mission will be the first flight around the moon in 50 years. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
New crash reported in Willowbrook. Got a motorcycle accident 105 westbound at Wilmington Avenue. Left lane is blocked off and traffic jams up at the 710 freeway. Vehicle stalled in Torrance on the 405 and open at Crenshaw Boulevard. They made it into the center divider, so they're waiting for help. The 405 slows down at the 110 freeway. And in San Pedro, Caltrans is closed around for the 110 southbound onto the Vincent Thomas Bridge. Looking for a crash in Fontana, left lane block 210 eastbound for Citrus Avenue. You might see some braking and swerving there while they try to get to the right shoulder.
Right now, there are young people across the world facing a tough choice. Continue their dream of education or drop out to help their family put food on the table. You can help change their future in a single moment. See how far your support can go at unbound.org.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The college basketball season ended with a dominant performance by UConn. UConn beat highly competitive San Diego State by 17 to win their 5th national championship since 1999. Sunday's LSU-Iowa women's national title game set a record with 9.9 million viewers on ABC ESPN. The rating topped a previous record of 4.85 million viewers for last year's title game between South Carolina and UConn. LSU players are not feeling a suggestion made by First Lady Jill Biden. Biden says she would like to invite LSU and Iowa to the White House for a celebration. White House celebrations for sports teams are usually just for the champions. LSU guard Alexis Morris said she would rather go to Michelle Obama's house if Jill Biden insists on bringing Iowa. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, conversation, and opinions when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm young, gifted, and black. KBLA Talk 1580, we do more than just talk.
Hey there, I'm Jared Hill, president of the National Association of Black Journalists of Los Angeles, and I just want to say thank you for the benevolent $10,000 donation and scholarships for the next generation of black journalists.
And I'm Haywood Galbraith, photojournalist and founder of the Minority Photojournalism Institute. Thanks, KBLA, for your generous $10,000 scholarship gift to help us train the next generation of black photojournalists.
Congratulations to all the students who will benefit from the scholarship dollars raised at our Black History Month luncheon honoring black legends in LA media. When we come forward at KBLA Talk 1580, we're bringing everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody
with us. This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
Join Black Wealth Matters, an educational series as we explore and explain the Black College Athletes Playbook in a 5-part series starting April 6th. Dr. Davarian Baldwin, an award-winning scholar and author, seen in Time, CNBC, and more, helps us follow the college dollars. Coach John Mosley, fan favorite of Netflix's docuseries Last Chance U, covers the new world of the college athletes. David McGriff, one of the leaders in the NIL and sports world and owner of the McGriff Agency, explains NIL and the effects on black athletes. Keisha Richardson gives the challenges of raising a black athlete. And last, for the bonus series, we want to give athletes the tools to capitalize from their name and likeness with swimming bronze medalist from the 2021 Paralympics, Jamal Hill. There is no cost for the series. It's a live webinar. Questions are welcome. Register on KBLA1580.com.
This is KBLA Talk 1580, where hate loses and love wins.
I'm Tavis, Smiley. We're glad to have you in with us in this first hour today on KBLA Talk 1580. Our phone number, 1-800-920-1580, 1-800-920-1580. A lot going on, in case you've just tuned in. As we said earlier, in our second hour, we'll go straight to the East Coast and track the Donald Trump saga today. He is in New York now, and I was literally just looking at his schedule of movement for the next couple hours in the city, as he makes his way to the DA's office and then into the courtroom for the arraignment. A historic day, first time ever. A president, former president, twice impeached, indicted, and now today arraigned, fingerprinted, perhaps a mugshot. It's quite a moment that many predicted a long time ago, that Donald Trump would eventually get himself in this kind of trouble, being as reckless as he has been. So we're tracking that. We'll get to that in hour 2 with Chris Lehman, and in hour 3, Michael Eric Dyson, as we commemorate today the 55th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. King. What a day it is in America. Now, though, we're pleased to be joined in conversation by Dr. Nika White. After being inspired to commit resources to promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion 3 years ago following the murder of George Floyd, there's now a declining wave of DE&I in companies as they continue to phase out DE&I leaders at an alarmingly high rate. And as I said earlier, take a guess as to who's being impacted by this. You guessed it, ding, 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 black workers. Award-winning DE&I professional Dr. Nika White, author of the new book, Inclusion Uncomplicated, a transformative guide to simplify DEI, joins us for a conversation now about what's happening inside of corporate America after these promises they made just a few years ago. Dr. White, how are you today?
I am doing very well. How are you? Thanks so much for having me.
I'm doing well. If I complain about being ingrate, I'm delighted to have you on. Let me just jump right in, watching the time we have here between now and the top of the hour. The broad question first. What's happening in corporate America? They made all these promises just 3 years ago, and now they are apparently doing a 180. Why?
Tavis, that is precisely what's happening right now. You know, I believe that because the murder of George Floyd was so visible, it was so hard, it certainly was jarring, and it created this groundswell of support around many organizational leaders who determined that we can no longer sit on the sidelines. We have to do something. And that something ended up being designating a person that is experienced in this area of equity and inclusion to help the organization deepen its commitment, and not only just, theory, but also in practice. And so I know that many DEI practitioners, including myself, were really optimistic about the shift and the motivation that it seemed like so many organizations had. And now, a couple of years later, we're really disheartened. We're disheartened because the endurance factor that we were anticipating the murder of George Floyd would have created, it's no longer. It hasn't been sustained. And in fact, there's been a lot of adverse effect where organizations are being criticized for the performative nature in which they have engaged in this equity work.
So what's behind the 180 specifically?
Well, I think is that organizations are finding it hard to be able to commit to the long haul of the work, probably because they haven't valued it to the level in which they should, especially when we consider the economic downturn that many organizations are bracing themselves for, or even in the midst of right now. But I think that they are misguided because they are not considering that part of how they're going to be able to survive the economic downturn is if they remain committed to allowing everyone to feel a sense of belonging and to be able to have full opportunity for success. And so the culture and the workplaces of these organizations are being compromised, and I think they're going to soon see that.
Mm-hmm. When you say that they are not committed to the work, let's unpack that for a second. Tell me about the work. Tell me about the work. If you are a company X, Y, or Z, and after George Floyd, you committed to do better by DE&I, and now we see you doing a 180 because you've not really truly been committed to the work. What does that mean? What are they abandoning? What are they not engaging?
Well, I think that a lot of organizations are taking a surface approach. And so, again, they are checking boxes. And when you do that, it's hard to have a stick-to-itness factor, that endurance piece that I was talking about before. You have to really look at systems, policies, procedures, and culture in order for you to be able to create impact. Right now, what we're seeing is a lot of activity, right? And activity has start and end date. Impact is where we really are able to drive and sustain the work. I think additionally, we have organizations that are not being very strategic about creating the right environment for DEI to really be fully infiltrated throughout all areas of operations. It's being seen as maybe a separate initiative or program where it's not very well resourced, and it's seen as the sole responsibility of maybe the 1 to 2 people that carry the title of Chief Diversity Officer, Manager, Director, whatever the titles are, instead of it being something that really is owned by all areas, all leaders throughout the organization, because this work does belong to all of us. And I think that with that mindset, it is hard for organizations to really get behind seeing the results because they're looking for something to happen overnight. Well, if you're giving a half effort, then a half effort is what you're going to receive on the back end. And that half effort is causing people to then question and criticize whether or not DEI is even viable, whether or not it's relevant.
Yeah.
Some see it as a distraction. And so I think there's a mindset shift that needs to occur as well.
So, excuse me, to your point, some do see it as a distraction. Let me just push back on that. Not that you need me to do this, but some see it as a distraction. And it's hard for me to, again, wrap my brain around the fact that they could, in this moment, see it as a distraction for the following 2 reasons. Number one, as you well know, we now live in the most multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic America ever. That's Exhibit A.
Absolutely.
Exhibit B is that we all know we're pushing toward that day in the not-too-distant future when, for the first time ever, America will be a majority-minority country. So that's on the horizon as well. So, and in the context of that, you see these companies pulling away from DE&I, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. So here's my question. What ultimately are companies risking, given those first 2 data points? What are companies risking by abandoning in this moment their commitment to DE&I?
Well, first and foremost, they're risking a workforce. You know, when we talk about the global majority and what that looks like and starting to shift and evolve, they're missing the workforce. These are individuals that are going to be, they're leaders in their organizations to help, you know, create that level of innovation that's needed, that ingenuity to help them to be differentiated from others. And so, you know, a lot of people I know will talk about the business case, the business imperative. And yes, that is important. And I do think that we need to make sure we're mindful to bring that to the conversation, especially when we're talking to particular leaders where that is how we're going to get their attention. But then I also think that we need to focus on just the humanity aspect of it. The bottom line is that no one can show up at their best in any environment if they're always questioning whether or not they belong. Do I belong here? Am I seen? Am I valued? Am I heard? Do I have full opportunity for success? So when we take that and we consider the individuals that make up our organizations, then we are not optimizing our output because if people can't show up at their best, then they're not giving their best. And so the whole organization then is compromised. And so that's what I think people need to be considering is how are we positioning ourselves in our environment and organizations to make sure that everyone can show up at their best.
Yeah. So that's the risk. Let me move now to talk about the harm. Specifically, who is being harmed inside these companies, or for that matter, outside? Who's being harmed by this increasing lack of commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
So I'm going to say everyone. That's where I'm going to start, but the broad answer of everyone. And the reason why is because this work of equity and inclusion, there's no zero-sum game. Everyone benefits when we are committed to it. Now, I'm going to now answer the question from a standpoint of what are the populations? What are those identities that oftentimes find themselves most compromised within these environments that are not really committed to inclusion and equity? And those are individuals that are part of marginalized communities, people of color, people that are part of the LGBTQ plus community. And so when we aren't centered on really helping to equip the most marginalized with the support that they need, then ultimately all of us suffer. And I don't think that that's a conversation that's being had enough right now. A lot of cis white men perceive, who are the ones, of course, who are in positions of power and influence in most organizations today, but they sometimes perceive that in order for marginalized identities to be able to have opportunity, that someone else has to lose. And in their minds, who are the people that are losing are people that look like them, instead of seeing that we all are able to come up. Rising tide lifts all boats. And so I think it's critically important for us to make sure that we're reframing, where we need to help people to understand that and not just see it as, we're going to lose because we're allowing opportunities for others who don't look like us to win.
When we come forward, I want to talk more about that reframing, number one. I want to talk, number two, about how we hold these companies accountable for abandoning the commitments they made literally just 3 years ago, and some more with Dr. Nika White, author of the book Inclusion Uncomplicated, a transformative guide to simplify DE&I. You're listening to Dr. White right now on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580 is an intervention. When we come forward, includes you. KBLA Talk 1580, turning pain into power.
The FAA will be hiring air traffic controllers soon. Applications open June 24th through June 27th. If you know someone between the ages of 18 and 30 who might be interested, please tell them to go to www.faa.gov/BE-ATC to apply today. The salary range is $103,000 to $164,000. There's also paid training and school. Again, that's www.faa.gov-BE-ATC. Again, that's www.faa.gov/BE-ATC to apply to be an air traffic controller. This community call to action is brought to you by the Organization of Black Aerospace Professionals and KBLA Talk 1580.
Access granted.
In a survey conducted by the public opinion research firm Eviderus, KBLA Talk 1580 consistently emerged as the station of choice for black audiences in the Los Angeles media market and beyond. The survey also revealed that the vast majority of black audiences are concerned about the lack of black-owned media and are more likely to listen to talk radio that focuses on issues that impact the black community. For some reason, the other talk stations haven't quite figured that out.
If you think about KFI, well, KFI only has like a 3% black listenership. 3%. So there's a good 97% out there to support a station like KBLA.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black.
Mornings were made for better things than rheumatoid arthritis or RA. Xeljanz tofacitinib is a pill for adults with moderate to severe RA when tumor necrosis factor blockers did not work well or could not be tolerated. Xeljanz can help relieve joint pain, swelling, and help stop further joint damage. Xeljanz can lower your ability to fight infections. Don't start if you have one. Before and during treatment, your doctor should check for infections like TB and do blood tests. Serious, sometimes fatal infections, cancers including lymphoma and lung, blood clots, serious heart-related events, tears in the stomach or intestines, and allergic reactions have happened. People 50 and older with heart disease risk factors have an increased risk of death. Tell your doctor if you've had hepatitis B or C, have flu-like symptoms, are prone to infections, or have ever had a heart attack, stroke, clot, or other heart problems, or swelling of lips, tongue, throat, or hives. Ask your doctor about prescription Xeljanz. Visit Xeljanz.com or call 1-844-XELJANZ.
Let's unpack a little bit more with Tavis Smiley. The conversation continues right now.
Dr. Nika White, you wrote the book Inclusion Uncomplicated, a transformative guide to simplify DEI. So tell me how, to your point about reframing, how do we go about getting corporate leaders to rethink, to reframe their belief systems or lack thereof about the value of corrective programs like DEI?
So, Tavis, I think that the first thing is we have to make sure those leaders are seeing the work of DEI as an opportunity and not an obligation. I think right now a lot of leaders arrive to the conversation thinking, what can we do to help support DEI versus what can DEI do to help make us better, to help us to be a higher performing organization, to help us to be on the cutting edge of all of the great innovation. And I think that's a really important shift that has to occur. Secondly, I think that we are so used to hearing that diversity in and of itself is what creates all of the value that we read about in research, but we need to make sure we are educating appropriately on that because it's not just diversity in and of itself, it is appropriate management of diversity. So what are you doing to make sure that the culture and the environment is allowing for difference? to be something that people celebrate and see as a value add instead of something that is compromising, right? I think that the reason sometimes a lot of the division takes place in organizations is how in which we think about difference or diversity. We classify it as right, wrong, good, or bad instead of just difference. So that's another reframe that I think is critically important. And I really, through the book Inclusion Uncomplicated, my goal was to help unpack some of the complexities around this work. I think that is a barrier because it keeps so many leaders on the sideline because of how daunting it feels. It's not an easy entry point, if you will. So if we can help provide that level of understanding to where the work can become a bit more practical for people, I think that's an opportunity for us to get more engaged.
Yeah. You mentioned a moment ago, and I love the phrase, I love the frame, that they have to see this as an opportunity, not an obligation. Let me ask point blank whether or not you saw this moment coming. And here's what I mean by that. As one who is in a media space, a black-owned media space, I knew it was just a matter of time that all these companies who promised they were going to do better by supporting black-owned businesses would eventually fall by the wayside. And I said to my colleagues in the industry, a couple of years ago, we have to find a way now to make sure that we can hold these companies accountable. There ought to be some reckoning for all these companies. Somebody ought to have all these companies in a database. We need to come together and hire a couple of interns if we need to, just to track everything that these companies are saying they are going to do after the murder of George Floyd, and hold them accountable 2, 3, 4 years down the road when I can assure you they're going to do a 180 and disappear and forget the commitments that they made. So I saw this coming in the black advertising space. All these commitments, we're going to do better by supporting black-owned media. It ain't happened. So Byron Allen, people know, is running around suing everybody trying to get his. That's Byron's approach, and I ain't mad at Byron, knowing well and ain't mad at him. But Byron is doing that because he's sick of all these people who made these commitments 3 years ago to support black-owned media, and they ain't stepping up. So Byron saw it coming. I saw it coming. With regard to DE&I, did you see the retrenchment on their commitment coming?
I think that for me, I was really hopeful. It's not to say that I was naive, but I was really hopeful because I do believe that hope is so important. Steve Bryson talk about this all the time. We have to have hope. Otherwise, it will cause us to quit even before we can see any type of improvement. But, the problem at one point was that people weren't even having the conversations. They didn't even see it as, especially from a corporate America perspective, they didn't even see it as something that was in their lane, right? I'm not in the social justice space. Let's let the social justice organizations deal with that. So I have to say, I think that part of that hope that many of us felt was because we were now seeing leaders that were influenced by what took place to the point to where they were then a part of the conversation. Now, you're right. Fast forward a couple years later. Did it pan out the way that many of us had hoped for? No. Is accountability a really big piece of helping us to get there? Absolutely. So, it's not just about the measurement. It's also about the accountability.
Let's close on that note. When we come forward, I want to go there anyway, so you are both prescient and prophetic, and so I'll follow you. In a moment, we'll tackle that final question in this conversation with Dr. Nika White. Her book is called Inclusion Uncomplicated, a transformative guide to simplify DE&I, and we will address that issue of how we hold these companies accountable who are now abandoning their commitment to DE&I. You're listening to KBLA Talk 1580.
A safe place to go loud. A great place for progressive politics. KBLA Talk 1580.
All I need is one mic.
For KBLA Talk 1580, I'm Tavis Smiley with a KBLA editorial. I've said it all along. Presumption of innocence, fundamental fairness, due process. Convicted now on 7 counts in his federal bribery case, L.A. City Councilman Mark Willie Thomas scarcely got 1, and his chances of getting the other 2 were slim to none, and Slim was out of town. Did you hear the jury forewoman's comments? The jurors were confused by the jury instructions, confused by the answers to the almost 12 questions they sent to the judge. She acknowledged that some jurors were not even paying attention, and she said the jury knew that the $100,000 contribution from MRT was legal, but the way the jury instructions were written made them feel like they had to find MRT guilty of wire fraud. Again, those are her words. So let me offer you just 3 questions that I want you to ponder. 1, why do you think the U.S. government spent millions of dollars of your money going after an alleged $100,000 bribe? 2, USC is in the news almost daily, it seems, for yet another violation of some law or the contestation of somebody else's humanity. But unlike all the other cases, they didn't get caught by some LA Times investigation. No, USC walked this particular case involving a powerful black leader into the U.S. Attorney's Office. Who made that decision, and how and why was it made? 3, while all the focus is on the indictment of Donald Trump, are you paying attention to all the other high-profile black elected officials that are being targeted across the nation by the Justice Department? Joe Biden's Justice Department. I'll let you marinate on that for a second. The judge in one case involving a high-profile black elected threw the charges out and told the government to kick rocks. It doesn't matter who's in charge. The hunting season for black folk is always open. I do not purport to know what's next for MRT. What I do know is that his legacy of love and service to our community is intact. What I do know is that God can turn your shipwreck into a submarine. As for all the rest of us, be vigilant, be sober, be circumspect. Just because you don't believe in conspiracy theories don't mean they ain't after you. For KBLA Talk 1580, I'm Tavis Smiley. We, of course, welcome your comments.
Conversations that matter. You're listening to Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580.
This is indeed a conversation that matters, and I've been delighted to have it for the better part of this half hour with Dr. Nika White, who's the author of the book Inclusion Uncomplicated, a transformative guide to simplify DEI. We've got about 2.5 minutes left in this conversation. Dr. White, I'll give it to you. How then, in this moment where all these companies who made these commitments 3 years ago after the murder of George Floyd to do better by diversity, equity, and inclusion, they're now abandoning their commitments. Black folk in the workplace are being harmed, and other people of color, as you mentioned, being harmed by this abandonment. How do we hold these companies accountable? Can we?
I think we can. And I think it starts first with recognizing that when organizations make public statements regarding their commitments, then they are, in essence, inviting public accountability. So when we think about the word public, we have to really dissect that. Who are we talking about prescriptively? I think there are multiple audiences, one of which are the consumers, the ones who are on the receiving end of their products and their services. How are we calling in the behaviors that are contrary to what they have publicly stated they are committed to? And then I also think about employees, and we're seeing this now. Many individuals are leaving organizations because of the harm, because of the toxicity, and because of the lack of commitment to their well-being, particularly as individuals that are part of marginalized communities. And so employees, with their walking out, with their leaving and transitioning, are certainly holding organizations accountable. But then I also think that the ultimate responsibility rests with a lot of these board of directors. And so some of us could question where if the board of directors aren't also aligned around the philosophy and the value sets of equity and inclusion, how can they hold an organization accountable? And therein lies the opportunity and the problem that we have to solve for. We need to make sure we're continuing to push the agenda around what do these boards look like? What do they care about? How are they representing the broader interest of those who often aren't at the table? And I think that when we consider governing bodies such as board of directors, that's where the impact can really begin to take shape in a way that allows for equity, inclusion, and belonging.
As we all know, the old adage, if you're not at the table, you're likely on the menu. So you need to be at the table. The book is called Inclusion Uncomplicated, a transformative guide to simplify DEI. It's authored by DEI expert Dr. Nika White, who I've been honored to have on this program, although under strange and bizarre circumstances, given that these folks said they were going to do one thing and now they're lying. But I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate the book, Inclusion Uncomplicated. Good to have you on, Dr. White. All the best to you.
Thanks so much. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you. My great delight to have you on. As we move to hour 2 after news, traffic, and sports, we're just an hour or so away on the East Coast from Donald Trump showing up for his arraignment. We will walk you through the movement that's about to happen in Manhattan, literally just an hour from now, and unpack a great deal more about this arraignment and some other topics perhaps we'll get to. We shall see. But this is the story of the day, the arraignment of the first former president ever, already twice impeached, Donald Trump, about to be arraigned in Manhattan. We'll be joined by Chris Lehman of The Nation magazine when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. There's a huge security presence in New York City ahead of today's historic arraignment of former President Donald Trump. Crowds are already gathering outside of the courthouse in Lower Manhattan, where a limited number of tickets are being handed out to watch the proceedings. Today marks the 55th anniversary of the assassination of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The civil rights leader left behind his wife, Coretta Scott King, and 4 children, one of them, Martin Luther King III.
I thought I was dreaming when I first heard on the news, which would have been this evening at 7 o'clock, that my father had been shot.
King was shot to death at the age of 39 on a balcony outside of his second-story room at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Headed through Commerce, it's going to be a collision on the 5 north at Washington. That's in the center divider with a busy drive from Imperial Highway. Carpool lane blocked with a crash in Inglewood. The 405 south approaching Florence, Manchester. This is the carpool lane and the left lane with a collision as far back as Washington Boulevard, Culver, the busy drive. Long Beach, your 405 north at Cherry, a wreck in a center traffic lane slowing us from the 605. Also Long Beach, the 91 east at the 710. Carpool lane with a collision with a busy drive from Alameda Street.
Right now, there are young people across the world facing a tough choice. Continue their dream of education or drop out to help their family put food on the table. You can help change their future in a single moment. See how far your support can go at unbound.org.
Is this the time? This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The college basketball season ended with a dominant performance by UConn. Previous record of 4.85 million viewers for last year's title game between South Carolina